Hello, everyone. Welcome to the breakout session on accelerating climate, clean energy, and equity actions in New Hampshire. My name is Rob Werner. I'm the New Hampshire State Director for the League of Conservation Voters. Thanks for joining us today, and I hope you've enjoyed the conference so far and the conversations with all of our great speakers and students. So to get started, I'd like to do is just take a couple of minutes to set the table, and then I'll turn it over first to Lisa Drake, one of our three speakers, followed by Sheila Vargas, and then Arnold Mccullough. So I was thinking about this session today in a couple of ways. On the one hand, there's a lot of very positive things that are happening on the federal level that certainly will filter down to New Hampshire and is heading in the right direction. On the other hand, I think, as you well know, we're facing a lot of political and policy challenges in New Hampshire at the moment in terms of pursuing an aggressive clean energy climate action agenda. There are some things that we can get done, but we do find ourselves in a situation of defensive posture in many ways to defend what we have worked hard to achieve thus far. For example, I know the legislature is looking at shaving back our renewable portfolio standards. I think recent action in the House Science and Tech Energy Committee in the House, that bill may be put into a study, and so we may not have to that right now, but that doesn't mean we can't pay attention to it. There's other policies that the current leadership in the legislature are not particularly interested in pursuing, and I think chief among those, and a really missed opportunity, is continuing to work to implement energy efficiency programs, whether that's using our RGGI dollars the way they ought to be used in terms of energy efficiency programs, or working with the PUC, Public Utilities Commission, to be more assertive about energy efficiency programs. But given that situation, a lot of us are, again, fighting to defend. The one thing that we might be able to get done, we're optimistic about, is moving our net metering cap from the current 1 megawatt situation to at least 5 megawatts for municipalities and school districts. That remains to be seen where that's going to end up in the legislature, but at least I think we have some expectation that that's got a good chance of passing, which will be a step forward. So it's really sort of a tale of two cities in a way, in terms of the national scene and how that is going along, and how it is that we're going to negotiate our way in New Hampshire to make sure that we can do all we can do in terms of pushing our agenda forward, which is one of not only environmental protection, but one of job creation, one of creating economic opportunity, and creating and expanding equity and racial justice in terms of how we are approaching these issues. So what I'd like to do now is to turn it over to Lisa Drake, who works for Stonyfield. She is the Sustainability and Innovation Director there, but she also has the distinction of chairing the New Hampshire Businesses for Social Responsibility Advocacy Committee, which does a lot of work in many issue areas, and certainly works with a wide variety of businesses. So thanks, Lisa.
Yeah, thank you, Rob. Thanks for all your work to get us on here today live and talking about this important work going on in our state. And as the Director of Sustainability Innovation for Stonyfield, I have worked to use Stonyfield's voice in a positive way to influence these topics. We are engaged as both an actor in addressing climate change and as an advocate for energy efficiency, clean energy, and carbon impacts. And so this is on the global, federal, and state level that we engage, as well as with our consumers, and using the connection that we have with the folks who love our yogurt, and really lifting up their engagement in these topics as well. And so we're really excited to see what's happening on the federal level right now, and we for sure support the administration's effort and work that's going on there, and we continue to engage in conversations with Congress, and think it's really important to drive climate as a nonpartisan issue. Our priorities greatly lie around agriculture and climate right now, and on the federal level. And here on the state level, we recently joined with other businesses in a letter supporting energy efficiency under the EERS standard in front of PUC, and really showing a business voice for recognizing the need for investment in energy efficiency. I think that there is a misunderstanding that the business community only cares about energy rates. I think as a business, for sure, we are concerned about energy costs, but we look at it from a variety of perspectives, including, not only what is good for our bottom line, but how can we invest to reduce our costs overall? And how can we be a positive actor in helping transition to a clean energy economy? So one of the things Stonyfield has also done is, if you want to pull up my slide, Gabby, we have joined with over 120 signatories on something we call the Clean Energy Principles. And these are all businesses who are based or active in New Hampshire, who are speaking up to say that as businesses, as employers, we know that transitioning to a clean energy economy is important for our businesses and the competitiveness, but also for the state as a whole, for our state's health, for our people's health, and for long-term prosperity in the state. And so this was an effort New Hampshire Businesses for Social Responsibility did in conjunction with Ceres, who, if you've been listening to the program, Allie Gold Roberts comes from the Ceres program and has helped us develop this statement. And so if you want to advance the slide, it has some specific statements relative to why clean energy is important to businesses. And so in those include that energy and energy efficiency investments and clean energy are essential to make us more competitive, that they help us protect the natural resources of the state, our health and our economy, that it will help us shift away from fossil fuels and support a truly local and clean energy economy, and that there's really an opportunity here for the state to create jobs as well. So there's businesses from across New Hampshire that have supported this statement. We really feel like it's important for businesses to step up and show that we are taking a long-term view on this topic, and that we want to be partners in creating a better future for New Hampshire.
Great, thanks. So next up is Sheila Vargas. She's the Government and Community Relations Manager at the Nature Conservancy, and we do a lot of work together on legislative and policy work. So take it away, Sheila.
Thanks, Rob. It's hard to follow Lisa. I've heard so much about her work, and I'm really glad to be on this panel today with both Lisa and Arnold. So thank you very much for including us. As Rob said, my name is Sheila Vargas. I'm the Government and Community Relations Manager for the Nature Conservancy here in New Hampshire. The Nature Conservancy, which is often referred to as TNC, we are a global environmental organization, and our conservation work touches down in 72 different countries and territories around the globe. Our overall mission is to conserve the lands and waters on which all life depends. And specifically here in New Hampshire, we've been working since 1961 to protect more than 294,000 acres. Excuse me. And I do want to note that, as Lisa said, there are certainly some misconceptions around, why businesses might be only focused on rates. I also think that extends to the environmental community. There's definitely some misconceptions around environmental groups, and at the Nature Conservancy, as Lisa said, we are very committed to moving forward legislation that's bipartisan and working with businesses. So there in New Hampshire specifically, we are working to build more non-traditional coalitions around clean energy work here. And of course, as you are all aware, with climate change being our biggest existential crisis, here in New Hampshire, the work that we're doing around clean energy and climate is specifically working to assist the state in achieving net zero emissions by 2050. That's one of our highest priorities. We're also working towards a significant reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by a transition to a clean energy future. We have a very high focus on ensuring that renewables are well sited and that energy projects respect our wildlife in our communities. And then we also know through science that we can mitigate the impacts of climate change through a wider network of climate resilient and connected lands that actually allow wildlife and biodiversity to thrive while we meet our clean energy needs as a state and as a region. So happy to talk more, but I think that's a pretty high level overview.
Thanks, Sheila. And I also want to now call up Arnold Mccullough. He has multiple roles, actually. He works for the Conservation Law Foundation as the environmental justice advocate. He's also the co-chair of the new Manchester NAACP Environment and Climate Justice Committee. So Arnold, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Rob, and apologies for not having the video. My internet is kind of spotty. But like Rob just said, my name is Arnold Mccullough, and my primary role is an environmental justice advocate with Conservation Law Foundation, which I joined last year. And I just want to preface by saying that my previous roles that I've been able to do before joining CLF, I was more of like an activist and a social justice advocate. And quite honestly, environmental justice was just a foreign concept at that point. But since just March of 2020, I started getting to like just learning more about environmental justice issues, and I quickly realized that there is a correlation between social justice and environmental justice, which was my primary role before joining CLF. So that has kind of motivated me to just kind of connect the dot, because there's so many environmental injustices that are heavily burdening the low-income communities as well as people of color. So just a quick overview. At CLF, our four focus, or at least I'll say one of our many focuses, and I'm just gonna cite four. We are working on the climate change. We're working on oceans, clean water, peoples and communities. And I'll just pick two to kind of be brief and just kind of give an overview. So on the climate change, we are building our clean energy future, and we are pushing for policies and projects that boost low-income communities as well as people of color. And the people in communities, which is where I focus most of my work, excuse me, we are working to end the unfair environmental burden imposed on low-income communities of color and bolster the quality of life in New England, as well as in New Hampshire. So here in Manchester, my primary goal has been to establish an environmental justice community, which before my joining the role at CLF as an environmental justice advocate, it was non-existent. So just seeing that now we have organizations that are working but on a grassroots level, we didn't have folks from the community actually being part of the environmental justice process, who could actually champion on some of the issues that are affecting them. And some of the issues that have come up, lead poisoning has been one of them. We've also had a lot of infrastructure issues that are affecting our community, especially low-income neighborhoods. So an example would be the double lane one-way streets are pretty much play a role of highways. So if you're familiar with Manchester, you realize that the street of Maple Streets, Beach, Chestnut, and Pine Streets have one-way streets and double lane streets. So what happened is vehicles, instead of going through the speed limits, usually vehicles flies. But when you go up north of those same streets, you realize that it's the most affluent part of Manchester, and they have a one lane and a bike lane and a safe sidewalk. So part of my work's been really to empower the community, to help them advocate for themselves and be champion of these issues. The other thing that we are working on is food security, as well as green space, to create green space. Again, my focus is mostly in low income and people of color, because that's where the environmental justice burden has rested. And trying to figure out ways and spaces where we could have more community gardening. So that way, the issue of food security could also be resolved in the process, but also just kind of provide more green spaces where children can go and play safely. With the NAACP, we are just established that committee, like Rob mentioned, and we are also looking to similar issues. However, the NAACP is more of like empowering other organizations already doing the same work. So like the LCV or the Nature Conservancy, those are just a few examples of organizations are working with the NAACP to kind of have that platform the NAACP provide, obviously, to advocate for people of color. So I'll stop there for now.
Thanks. So what we're going to do now is turn it over to our students, and they're going to ask questions of our panelists and tell you a little bit about themselves. So I'll start with Maddie Britting from UConn, who is grew up in Londonderry.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thank you to all the panelists for being here. As Rob mentioned, my name's Madison. I grew up in Londonderry, New Hampshire, and I am currently an undergraduate student at the University of Connecticut. And I'll be graduating in just a few weeks with a degree in physiology and neurobiology. And after that, I will be pursuing medical school. And my interest in science and biology, really began when I was very young, and I was fortunate enough to grow up in a state as beautiful, and as lush as New Hampshire is. And there were so many opportunities to go outside and explore. I went hiking, playing in the dirt, seeing all the species that are here in New Hampshire. And at a really young age, I kind of grew this respect and curiosity about all forms of life and how they all impact each other. As each time I went outside, I really felt this true joy and happiness that is really unmatched. And as my education continued, I started to understand how deeply connected our lives are with those in the environment, and more specifically how intertwined our health is with the health of our surrounding ecosystem. And I really dedicated myself to this fact, and the fact that when our environment's health suffers, ours does as well. And as we all know, unfortunately, the effects of climate change do not affect all of us equally. There are disproportionate impacts of climate change and harmful environmental effects on particular communities, and with this come disproportionate health impacts as well. And, New Hampshire is certainly not exempt from this. There are many regional disparities, including like northernmost regions of the state, as well as cities like Manchester, which was mentioned. So these negative impacts of climate change increase as our climate begins to respond to things like increasing emissions, and these impacts are only going to get increasingly worse, and certain communities in our state will feel even more unequal share of these environmental effects, as they already do, and our state's health disparities will increase. So we really have to ensure that all regions of New Hampshire have the ability to, anticipate and prepare for and recover from these threats with minimum damage to environmental and also human health. So my question is for Arnold. I know you kind of mentioned this a little bit, but how do you and the organizations, more specifically that you work for, plan to mitigate these disproportionate environmental impacts on the communities in our state to ensure that the health of everyone, despite, their socioeconomic status, place of residency, race, gender, etc. And maybe also additionally, how do you think other communities and other businesses in New Hampshire can join along with the things that you guys do?
Madison, thank you very much for that amazing question. I actually, in my notes, I kind of want to say Happy International Women's Day. I should have started with that earlier, so I still want to say that. So to mitigate some of the negative environmental impacts that are affecting people of color in our communities, we kind of do it. I kind of do it in two steps. The first one is through grassroots. You have to reach out to the community. You literally have to knock doors. You have to hold events, make sure that you're bringing the community together, because what I've noticed, and actually what CLF have noticed, is that organizations tend to come in and pretty much impose their will and say, hey, we are advocating for the community. We want to see X and Y, Z policy changing. The problem with that is that there is a lack of sustainability, because there is a lack of ownership from the actual communities and neighborhoods that are being affected. So that leads me to my second point, which is to have champions within neighborhoods that are being affected. And sometimes they actually don't know that they're being affected until there is an educational process where you actually say, hey, this is not normal, having a pollution or having a power plant near your house. This is not normal. And maybe putting things in perspective or in contrast, and actually show other neighborhoods that don't have the same environmental justice burdens that they are carrying. So once they see that difference and realize that this is actually a quality of life could actually be improved here, it brings a sense of ownership. And that's what's lacking when organizations just come in and say, well, we have the power to make change, but not involving the community in the process. So that has been one of my many approaches. The other one is through policy changes, monitoring legislation. Rob and I were talking yesterday, and he told me about this new legislation that came on, and I wasn't aware. And that's because I was on vacation, but this is also another area where a lot of folks in our community don't know that these policies are being enacted, being passed, and being brought to the legislation floor and becomes law. And in effect, they start affecting our community in a negative way. So those are the two ways that I've been approaching this environmental impact in our community. The second part, I think you mentioned about how other organization can do. I think I just kind of also included that in the answer as well. Having a grassroots, a genuine grassroots approach, I think that will help.
Great, thanks. Kristin, why don't you ask your question? Kristin is from Antioch University, New England.
Hi, thank you so much. My question is for Ms. Vargas, and I wanted to thank you, Ms. Vargas, for your work advancing state-based public policies that support climate and conservation goals for a healthier New Hampshire. My name is Kristen Thompson. I'm from Northeast New Jersey, and I'm a resource management and administration graduate student at Antioch University, New England. Growing up, I was fortunate to have many mentors who were leaders in local environmental advocacy in my hometown. My first introduction to environmental advocacy was through an activist named Carol Tilkey, who taught me the importance of preserving green spaces like our local arboretum. So, after getting my undergraduate degree, I interned at Highstead Foundation, a conservation organization in Connecticut. At Highstead, I helped support activities for their regional conservation partnership network across New England and New York. From this, I learned that the network is an incredible resource that brings together stakeholders from various sectors and encourages strategic collaboration to prioritize what areas to conserve across shared landscapes. For instance, to create habitat corridors. The value of coordinating local conservation actions to align with larger scale landscape and regional conservation needs translates to other contexts as well. Local social justice and climate mitigation and climate adaptation initiatives can meet the specific contexts where they're enacted, but benefit from coordination with surrounding towns and with the state. So, Ms. Vargas, now, how does New Hampshire public policy support strategic coordination among local climate and equity initiatives? And what is the Nature Conservancy planning to do to promote strategic policy formation?
Thank you for that very thoughtful question, Kristen. And man, your background, you actually sound like you have a little bit more experience than I do in the environmental community. So I just appreciate you sharing, and thank you for the question. As far as what the Nature Conservancy is doing, specifically around assisting local communities and blending together conserving lands and policy, we feel very strongly that we need to be in a position where we're listening and going to the individuals in the community who have already been doing a lot of this work. Obviously, as the Nature Conservancy, we have a bit of clout as far as we have 2 in-house lobbyists, and we have the capacity and the staff time to be able to push forward various policies, or in regards to this specific legislative session, we've been on the defense, so defending against various legislative policies, but we feel that building non-traditional coalitions is extremely important, and including the business voice as well as voices of individuals who have been disenfranchised. We don't feel like we need to be center stage, but we actually feel like it's a stronger strategy for us to support as opposed to being the centralized voice, and really lifting up the voices of individuals in the community, whether it's a conservation commissioner or a local science teacher, really lifting them up and saying, these are the individuals doing the work on the ground, and we're happy to make connections and build coalitions, and really just build strategy from there. But I certainly feel like the environmental community has done a lot of soul searching over the past year, and we know that there are various groups already doing a lot of this work, and so we feel like we need to work in tandem with them and not co-opt the work that's already been done.
Thanks, Sheila. Next, Jessica, why don't you ask a question? Jessica's from Franklin Pierce University. And by the way, Sheila is a proud alum of FPU.
Oh, thank you. Thank you everyone for being here with us today. My question is going to be for Ms. Drake. But first off, my name is Jessica Lopes, and I'm from Hudson, New Hampshire, which isn't actually that far from Stonyfield. And I'm currently studying environmental science at Franklin Pierce University. So at my college, we have a Climate Action Institute that allows us to focus on making the campus more sustainable. Right now, we're looking into ways to reduce our CO2 emissions by changing where we get our energy. Good way to do that is looking into solar energy to reduce almost half of our energy use, replacing it with renewable. I realize though that other schools and businesses are needed to help reduce the impact of climate change, and they may not have the same opportunities that we do. When I got the chance to read about your work in energy and climate advocacy for Stonyfield, as well as serving on the board of directors for Climate Counts, I thought you, Ms. Drake, would be the best person to ask this question to. So I would like to know what advice you could provide for other businesses or even schools that may not have the funds or the dedicated focus to change their energy usage and their impact on climate.
Well, thank you, Jessica. That is a great question. Stonyfield is somewhat unique in having such a strong focus and ability to commit a full staff person to work on these sustainability issues. And actually there's two of us that do that at Stonyfield. So it does take a lot of resources to bring that kind of expertise in-house. But it's also why Stonyfield is very much looked to build partnerships, to be engaged with organizations like New Hampshire Businesses for Social Responsibility, because we really do need to have all players at the table, and it can't be just the ones who may be inclined to dive deep into these issues, but to make it easier for all businesses to move in the right direction. It's also why we are very deeply engaged in policy, because policy is the key to raising the bar for all businesses. And so, for example, we've long supported the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, known as RGGI, which has been very successful in reducing greenhouse gas emissions from the electrical sector in our region. And so that doesn't take action by individual businesses. That ensures that the whole system is improving. And I think that there's room for individual actions, and businesses we encourage to be involved in taking action for understanding their climate impacts and acting on them in ways like you're referring to switching to renewable energy sources. But we also need the policy levers that helps us all as a community do change and, for example, reduce these emissions while having economic gains in our region through regional collaborations. So I think it's listening, it's being aware of what's happening in our state house here in New Hampshire, and unfortunately we have been in a position where we need to be on the defensive as of late for a lot of these programs, and that's unfortunate, because we want to move beyond defending what we've already done and continue to move forward. But again, I mentioned these clean energy principles that we have. We invite more businesses to take that relatively small step, just to step up and put your name on that as a business, to put your name on that list, to say, yeah, we believe in clean energy, and we may not be perfect, and none of us are, but we're looking to move forward together.
Thanks. And Jonathan Weinberg, last question from the students. And by the way, we will be taking some audience questions, so you can please put those in the chat. I already have some. Jonathan is actually on a current leave of absence from Whitman College, but he has the distinction of being elected to the Concord School Board last November. So we have a young policymaker in our midst. And Jonathan, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Rob. And yes, as Rob has said, I'm currently on leave from school and was recently elected for my local school board. So that has been a whirlwind, especially during a pandemic. Similar to Mr. Mikolo, I recently made the shift from activism to trying to get into a position to enact change, which, as everyone knows, then you encounter the bureaucracy and everything slows down a little bit. But I would say my story begins when I was 14 years old, and I was brought into the world of the New York Climate March. I had people down the hall in my environmental club being like, everyone, come sign up. It's a quick thing, $20. And the next morning I woke up at 4 a.m. and I found myself on a 6-hour drive down to New York City, where then you were bussed in, seeing students from DC, or people driving from Kansas even, in 20 hours. And it was kind of a really amazing experience that I think really just put me right into the political sphere and said that change is possible. And it's a type of energy when everyone came together that I never encountered before. And now on the school board, there's so much change that actually I would like to get done. But then we see how recycling yogurt containers or something simple, we see how easy it is for these plastics to get trashed so easily just because students do not know how to properly clean them out. Or otherwise, we want to make a transition to buses, but the infrastructure, as people discussed earlier, is so hard to find, especially for then finding a way to transport them. So my question is kind of just a general one. How do your organizations support local districts and municipalities who want to become more environmentally sustainable, but we also remain cognizant of the heavy burden on property taxes, especially in a state like New Hampshire? And what resources do you provide for local school districts and municipalities who want to make this shift happen but seek support? Thank you.
People just jump in.
Well, one thing that comes to mind for me, you know, and this comes back to state level policy and the need to expand net metering, and specifically the bills that Rob mentioned this year, that, you know, we think expanding net metering for anyone and everyone who wants to develop renewable projects should be an opportunity. But if the first opportunity is with municipalities and school districts, then great. Even if businesses can't yet participate in those larger renewable projects, that's fine. You know, like let's take the first step. Let's let these communities drive their own desires. You know, Concord has its 100% renewable energy goal, as does other communities across the state. And so we need policy that's going to support the communities to take charge of their own future and to make those kinds of investments and do it in a way that is, you know, most cost effective by being able to utilize net metering.
Yeah, I can jump in as well. I can say that, you know, the Nature Conservancy, we clearly support municipalities moving towards any renewable energy goals. Sadly, because we have not had statewide goals set in statute for things like emission reductions or the net metering legislation that has been vetoed in the past and hopefully has a bit of hope in going forward this session, municipalities have had to really take charge and do things at the local level. And that's one of the things I love most about New Hampshire and why I moved back here, is really the changes that can be done on the municipal level and by individuals. But I do think that there is, you know, there is a lack of leadership at the state level. And I'm hoping that if we can get some federal leadership to trickle down, some of the national policies will assist us in having some more statewide goals and statewide standards. Because while it's great that municipalities are taking the lead and taking charge, I do feel like there needs to be more support in that arena.
And Arnold, do you have a perspective on this question?
Maybe a little bit. I just want to say that oftentimes we know that because of, especially I'm going to speak specifically about the Manchester city because that's where I live and that's where I work, is that we have one of the largest cities in the whole state. We have the most diverse community in the whole state. And yet oftentimes our municipalities and school districts are the most underfunded. When it comes to access to resources, oftentimes, you know, the Manchester school districts come up short. There's always a shortage in teachers, in counselors, even just when it comes time to recruiting folks at the school district, there is a lot of competitiveness with town like Bedford that has a lot of money and it could actually afford to pay them even better than Manchester can. So we try to play a balance between, you know, give them a support in terms of how we can best advocate or how we can best collaboratively working together. But also at the same time, we have that, we reserve that, that position of holding them accountable when needed to. So it's a balancing act where we see where we could be best advocate and work collaboratively, but also be in a position where we can actually hold them accountable. Having in mind that also there is shortage in resources and funding as well.
Thank you all. We have time for a few questions. We're going to have to wrap this up in about 10 minutes or so. The issue of plastics, I know some folks have touched upon it, but I'm wondering if, and this is for anybody, panel, students, what would you like to see New Hampshire do about petrochemicals, plastics? I know that we have some challenges in some ways as to the way our government is set up vis-a-vis municipalities in the state, but we see around the country so much progress being made around single-use plastics. I'll just open that up.
I guess I can start. I think that, I feel this movement kind of had a little bit more momentum in the past, and I do agree that it has kind of piddled out. And I would say, this may be because we've kind of had some of these like really big goals coming to the scene, changing like this big energy change, things like that, that has kind of pushed these smaller movements to the side. And that's, they're still equally as important. And especially things like plastics and petrochemicals, they have, a huge like downstream effect for us, but also like every life form on our planet. So, Rob mentioned that there's this chance for, legislative change, which I think, has been approached, I think, early 2020 legislatively. But I think there's a lot of like things that can be done locally, like even, like I think it says, Bonnie, you asked the question, like even, us as individuals, we can do a lot to advocate and, push for this change. I think that's kind of how all these movements start. So, starting things Jonathan mentioned in like schools, like to teach kids, to clean out your plastic so that they can be recycled or things like that, even in like places like the workplace. So I think, a lot of this push, can, restart this movement by kind of these like grassroots efforts to, bring awareness and teach people. Maybe they'll get a little bit more motivated to then push for this like larger legislative change, which, certainly needs to happen in New Hampshire.
I can speak for Stonyfield's perspective. Plastic is an important material for us because we are packaging most of our product in plastic, and we do so because plastic does have so many benefits of being really protective of the quality of the food that's inside it, and being light to transport compared to glass, for example. And we also recognize the many problems with plastic as well. So we are for sure recognizing that we are part of the problem and that we want to be part of better solutions and a commitment to improvement in our own packaging. We have been going through in our country a recycling crisis in the last few years, since many of the markets in other parts of the world have shut down to receiving our waste. And we really need to rebuild, and invest in recycling infrastructure within our own country and improve the technology so that we can really have more closed loop solutions. So Stonyfield is evaluating our whole portfolio. We're concerned about the recycling questions, but we also know that the majority of the impact from our packaging choices are in the production of the materials and their carbon footprint. And so we really look at both parts of that scenario. And so, for example, we have moved to a plant-based plastic for one of our packages. We actually did this 10 years ago. And so it's one part of a slew of solutions that we need to bring into play, including more recycled materials and whatnot. So it's a complex issue, but again, recognizing our responsibility in being part of a solution to move us to a better place, because the current situation is not truly sustainable in the long term and has a lot of impacts that we don't really want to be a part of.
Great, thank you. This is for anyone. How are your organizations addressing white supremacy in our communities in conjunction with addressing the climate crisis? I think Sheila and others have touched upon this, but more specifically, what are your organizations, the environmental community in New Hampshire, doing to address these disparities?
Yeah, I'm happy to start. And I will say that after the murder of George Floyd, our organization, we have really been starting from the inside with our staff. So we set up, I guess, what would equate to a task force. It's an internal diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice staff group that is being led and supported by one of our local staff members as well as our state director. And so doing a lot of learning and unpacking around things like fortress conservationism, which is essentially the foundation for conservationism in the Western world, and really unpacking this untold history and aligning it, realigning our mission with that. So there has been so much that has really been left out of the conservation movement, so many individuals that have been marginalized from this effort. And we really feel like there needs to be a recalibration and a realignment in trying to get back to the core of this, because it really, environmentalism should not be a homogeneous profession or a homogeneous, I guess, policy moving forward. It needs to be as diverse as nature itself, and that's really what we believe. And so we at the New Hampshire chapter, because we're doing a lot as a global organization in North America as well, but at the New Hampshire chapter, we are really mostly in listening mode right now. We've held a lot of virtual events over the past year, a couple of them Black in nature, LGBTQ plus in nature, physical access to nature, to really learn more about what barriers currently exist to our outdoor spaces and how we as an organization can incorporate diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice lenses onto the work that we're already doing. And I could probably talk about this for much longer, but I don't want to hog too much of this question because I do think it's a very important one. But I guess in short, we are doing some. We don't feel like we can ever do enough. And we're certainly open to continuing to listen and learn and also take action, but thoughtful action.
Lisa and Arnold, any perspective on what your organizations are doing?
Yeah, I guess I would agree about being in listening and learning mode. And, a lot of our climate and clean energy advocacy is, we work closely with Ceres, and I know that Ceres is taking a deep look and examining policies and as part of their business policy network, recognizing the need to be intentional about including equity and inclusion as a lens on all the policies that we look at and that we stand for and that we speak up for. So I think, we've been speaking for carbon policy, carbon pricing, for example. This is something that can be done in a way that does or does not perhaps have an equity lens, and that we need to take another look at that, for example. And so there's work to be done, and listening and learning mode is one thing, and we need to move to action. But we're trying to do it in a thoughtful way. Stonyfield, this is a little outside of the realm of climate, but just for example, a number of businesses that we collaborate with have stood behind a bill that's in the Senate, the Energy Relief for Farmers of Color Act. And so this is about systemic discrimination that has left Black farmers with less land, higher debt, have not had full access to many of the agricultural incentive programs that others have had. And so we're really looking to, from an agricultural lens, weigh in on that front and try to correct some wrongs from the past. And there's a lot of work to do.
Arnold, let's finish up with you, and then we will be moving on to back to the main session. Shalonda Baker is going to be rejoining us to talk about her book, Revolutionary Power, which addresses many of these topics that we're talking about right now. So, but Arnold.
Yeah, thank you very much, Rob. I did join CLF in last summer, like I mentioned, but I was part of the advisory group that the Environmental Justice Committee had created in Manchester. Being in New Hampshire for the last 9 years since I came in the United States, I've been part of a lot of nonprofits, and I think that, you know, you can tell when an organization is doing something because they, you know, because of the board requirement or because of the funding requirement. But I've seen actually an organic change happening at CLF in addressing white supremacy. And this has been an internal process, obviously, but also an external one. The internal one, we've had affinity groups. One of them, which I'm part of and very happy to be part of, is the anti-racism affinity group, which again, like, you know, Lisa mentioned, is, you know, it's all about learning and unpacking. And we also have another affinity group, which is about diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is to look at all the policies the organization has, you know, and how inclusive or exclusive they are, you know, because it could just benefit some and not others. So that's also the other one. And I believe that CLF is realizing that, you know, and also I think is being to a point where it's actually knows that representation matters. And, you know, there's a saying that if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. So it does really matter who's at the table, especially when the decision-making process are being made, because that end up affecting everyone in the organization. So part of that effort, the hiring process have changed. Policy, examining policies, it's also another one that has been that's changing as well. So it's an intentional process, but also it's a sustainable process. But also I realize as a person of color that this journey, it's a journey, it's not a destination. So there is always work to be done, and there is always room for improvement.
Well, thank you. We've unfortunately run out of time. This has been a really interesting and fruitful and dense rich discussion, I should say. And I appreciate all of your participation. I appreciate all of you joining us for the conference and for this session. So now, if you have time to continue to be with us, you can click on the link in the chat, which will bring you back to the main room. And again, Shalonda Baker, who we heard from earlier from the Department of Energy, she has a really interesting book called Revolutionary Power. And she's going to be talking about that book during our lunchtime session. So thank you all once again, and have a great day. Take care. Bye.